Great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on supporting teens, school-age children, and young children 0 to 5 with meals and enrichment during COVID-19. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's conversation, and happy 2021. We hope you all are staying safe and taking care during this time. My name is Clarissa Hayes, like Nomi mentioned, and I am a policy analyst here at FRAC. I am very excited to be joined today by a FRAC colleague, as well as by 3 of our partners from the Afterschool Alliance, the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, and Too Small to Fail for today's event. We wanted to pull together this webinar today because during normal times, as we know, the child nutrition programs and learning and enrichment really go hand in hand. So, for example, school breakfast and school lunch ensure students have the nutrition that they need to learn in the classroom. And then during the out-of-school time hours, the after-school and summer meal programs help programs stretch their budget by allowing them to receive reimbursement for meals served and helps to draw children into essential programming. And then, of course, daycare and childcare settings serving meals through CACFP are critical supports for families. As we also know, COVID-19 has worsened many inequities when it comes to children's nutrition, education, and social emotional well-being, but the connection between learning and nutrition is essential right now. The full-time impact is unknown, but we do know that the impact on food insecurity and learning is already showing. So, for example, in 38 states in the District of Columbia, more than 1 in 10 adults with children said that they did not have enough to eat in the first few months of the pandemic, and we know that this is getting worse. Research also shows that student achievement in math was lower than the pre-COVID-19 performance. And of course, this research really doesn't touch on the emotional impacts on children as they are spending more time at home as a result of social distancing and remote learning. Fortunately, the federal child nutrition programs remain a really important support for addressing the hunger gap, thanks to ongoing flexibilities for meal service. There are also many opportunities for partnership and advocacy to ensure that students are engaged outside of the school day, with many of these efforts being run by state and national partners, including some of those that we have on the webinar today. So we do have a very full agenda with great speakers, so we are going to go ahead and go to the next slide so I can touch on what we will be covering today. So first, we are going to start with an overview of the child nutrition programs and what are options for meal service. These programs remain options during COVID-19, and like I mentioned earlier, there are many flexibilities and waivers which make meal service easier at this time. My colleague, Jerry Henshey at FRAC, will join me in sharing how these programs operate and what has changed due to COVID-19. After that, Eric Peterson from the Afterschool Alliance will give us a look at the changing after-school landscape and the important role that it plays, especially now. And last but not least, we will hear from 2 partners on activities and ways to keep children engaged and learning outside of the school day as we continue to see the impacts of COVID-19 on these arenas. So joining us, we have Daniel Hatcher, who is from the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, and we have Jane Park, who is from the Too Small to Fail through the Clinton Foundation. We will save some time at the end for Q&A, like Nomi mentioned, so feel free to use that function on your screen to submit any questions that you have for the speakers today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. At this time, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Jerry Henshey, to talk about the Child and Adult Care Food Program and WIC. Jerry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Clarissa. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to all of you about supporting good nutrition, food security, and health for young children during COVID-19 using CACFP and WIC. So if we go to the next slide, one thing that Clarissa was pointing out, and which I think we've all seen a lot of coverage on, and those of you who work directly with people have seen that people are suffering every day from food insecurity. There's alarming rates of food insecurity. 1 in 5 households is food insecure, and if we're talking about households with children, it's over 1 in 4. And in particular, if we look at the next slide, we'll see that the age group that I'm talking about, which is young children, families with young children are having even more problems. And so this is a different survey, Not Enough to Eat, COVID-19 Deepens America's Hunger Crisis. and it talks about more than 1 in 5 Black and Latinx adults with children reported in July that they sometimes or often did not have enough to eat, and that's our report. So if we look at the next slide, the impact of this food insecurity is really significant, particularly for very small children. It affects their development, their learning, and their health. And so we really want to do all that we can, and that's why we're having this webinar today with all these great speakers. So if we go to the next slide, my job, as Clarissa pointed out, is to talk about CACFP and the WIC program during COVID-19 and how we would maximize those programs from the various different sectors that interface with low-income families with young children. And we want to use these because the research shows that they help to reduce food insecurity, they help to alleviate poverty, they help to improve nutrition and health, and they are important for economic stability. So they're one of many things that needs to happen, but let's go to the next slide. And so what we'll talk about, as I said, is we're going to be talking about maximizing CACFP and WIC to support good nutrition and health for food security for young children during COVID-19. And we'll talk about CACFP first, and we'll actually spend more of our time on CACFP, and then we'll talk about WIC. So one thing that's important when we're thinking about CACFP, and if we look at the next slide, we'll definitely see that. What are we seeing now? Well, everyone who's in childcare is starting with their 2021 programming, and it's a mix for early care and education and all different kinds of childcare. Some of it's in person, some of it's hybrid, some of it's remote, which is really for childcare often what you think of as just closed down, where they're just sending some kind of packets home or something. So we're seeing a lot of this. We're seeing rotating classrooms within one center closing because someone's been tested positive. We're seeing closings of whole centers and then openings, same with family childcare. So we're seeing a lot of problems, and we're seeing, for example, in a place like California, for those of you who are from California, just a complete shutdown again and taking us back to the beginning of COVID as far as no one's going to childcare in most places unless for essential workers. So we have a range of things going on, but we definitely have the need for the COVID-19 waivers. So if we move now to the next slide, we know, and I think, and by we I mean all of us on the phone and on the webinar, that Congress gave USDA authority to issue nationwide waivers, and USDA has used that authority, and I think they've done a good job as far as childcare is concerned. And so if we go to the next slide, we can talk about what are the kinds of waivers that USDA has issued and that all of the states have issued and that the program operators are using. So one is that CACFP can operate as a non-congregate site, so they can offer meals off-site, they can do grab and go and delivered, and they can mix those. So if we go to the next slide, as long as whatever way that they want to give the food out is safe for everyone, then they can do it within the rules. Now, what you see here is some work that's happened in California. And so this Head Start, which is the child care center, it was delivering meals actually to some apartment complexes. Then also they were having pickup. And on the one side was an early picture before people realized that you had to wear masks. So it's in development, of course. And I'm just impressed with some of the great work that people have done. I'm sure some of you who are on the webinar have done some of that great work. And then next, there is an ongoing issue with needing flexibilities when people are menu planning because of disruption in the supply chain. So people can have those. They just need to get as close as possible to something that meets those nutrition standards, and they need to be specific about why they can't find it. And then the last slide that we're going to look at as far as waivers has to do with the ability to do virtual visits, which is really important because for quite a while, what was happening is if someone had a child care center, a family child care home that was in CACFP, they kept getting visits, which is really bad during COVID, so because these are in-person on-site visits. So there's been a lot of work done, and USDA has issued guidance on this, and actually the CACFP forum has issued some best practice And so really we're seeing that people are able to do the auditing that they need to and give the technical assistance they need to right now virtually. So this is important. And one of those things that we'll think about, what is that a lesson learned when COVID's over? So I just want to do one more point about CACFP during COVID. This is not waivers, but it's on the next slide. This is the new emergency funding for CACFP. This was in the bipartisan stimulus bill. So this is very important. So if you are a program operator as far as CACFP is concerned, if you do centers, home sponsors, after school programs, or you know people who are doing this, so in your work you are working with people who do this, it's going to be important to get this word out and have people get ready for this. It probably won't roll out for another 2 months, but it's going to be key, because if we look at the first 3.5 months of COVID, that money is going to be replaced, so half of March and April to June. So 55% of that money is going to be replaced, and that's to cover fixed costs. So this is great. It's really, really good. All right. So in the interest of time, let's move on to WIC access during COVID-19. WIC is really important during COVID-19, of course, and we've got a lot more people who are eligible for WIC now than were before because of the economic downturn created by COVID-19. Luckily, we also have some really good rules for people who need to go in WIC now during COVID-19. If we turn the page, we'll see one of those great new rules, which is that families can enroll over the phone. And enrolling in WIC has really always been an issue because people had to go into the clinic, and then just to continue to participate, had to keep going to the clinic. So this is great. So, if you're working with families who have young children, even so, for example, if you're an after-school program, you can tell people about WIC. And if you're a child care program, you can tell people about WIC. And if you're just a program who has other services and there's families with young children, you can tell them about WIC and tell them they can call up and get on WIC. So I think that's great. And the second point that I would make out of 3 that are new options for COVID-19 and WIC is remote benefits issuance, which is what can happen in most of the states now. So people can have their benefits issued down to their EBT cards, and they don't have to go in order to get that. That's also a COVID-19 waiver, something we'd like to see continued. And then the final slide on the waivers for WIC is that there are some WIC waivers around flexibilities and food package substitutions for shopping. Again, the same reason as we see these waivers in CACFP, supply chain disruption. And this has made things a lot easier for WIC clients. All of this are things that are really important for you to share with families that you think might be eligible for WIC. And so finally, I would conclude in terms of talking about WIC with these recommendations if you're going to work on advocacy around this, but definitely conduct WIC outreach through your networks and communities. Make sure people understand that they don't have to be physically present at the WIC clinic for enrollment and services. Urge state and local WIC agencies to provide WIC information about COVID in Spanish, including their websites, and then encourage state agencies to employ the options for flexibilities in WIC food package redemption to ensure cultural options. So really, that's it. I know we have a lot of other people we're going to hear from, but this is really a quick overview of how you can use CACFP and WIC to support good nutrition, food security, and health for young children during COVID-19. I'm going to turn it back over to Clarissa.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. That was a very helpful overview of the nutrition program options that are available for young children. So at this time, I'm going to turn to the programs for school-age children. So many of these may be familiar to you, but we wanted to give a quick refresher. Because of COVID, many things have changed. So next slide, please. The first 2 programs, again, most people are familiar with, school breakfast and school lunch. So these are the programs that during normal times provide nutrition during the school day. And there's actually really high participation in these programs compared to the out-of-school time meal programs that I'll touch on. So a vast majority of schools, around 95%, are participating in school lunch. So they're providing meals to around 30 million children on an average day. And then for the school breakfast program, around 93.6% of schools that serve lunch are also serving breakfast. So that's all to say that during normal times, innovation around school breakfast is definitely happening. So, for example, taking the meals out of the cafeteria and putting them into the classroom is a great way to make sure that all children are participating, and really helps to reduce stigma and some of those other barriers that we know come with reaching children with school breakfast. The other two programs that I wanted to touch on are the out-of-school timed meal programs. So there are two components of these, and these are the programs that really step in when the school day ends, either for the day or for the entire school year. So the summer nutrition programs, these are comprised of the summer food service program and the seamless summer option. And then for the after-school nutrition programs, we have two components here, the CACFP after-school meal program and NSLP snacks. So for both of these programs, like I mentioned, they do kind of complement the school meals. Both of these, you have to meet nutrition standards when serving meals, and then during normal times, these sites must be in areas where at least 50% or more of the children are eligible for free or reduced price meals. For summer meals, you can serve up to 2 meals at a site, and then for after school, if you are doing CACFP after school meals, you can serve up to a supper and a snack. So these programs are really similar. One thing that I would say is different between them is that for the after school nutrition programs, you do have to offer some kind of enrichment or educational component. And I wanted to call this out because this is something that has shifted a bit during COVID, and that's where a lot of the partners who are here on the call and, working in states can give insight on. So there does have to be an enrichment component, and this can really be as simple as tutoring or homework help or any kind of after-school activity that is normally happening. Of course, we know things are different right now. Many children are not in the school building, so there are some flexibilities around this and with meeting these requirements, which I will cover on the next slide. All right, so Jerry has mentioned this. I mentioned this earlier in the webinar, but USDA has issued many waivers and flexibilities during COVID-19 because we know that children are not in the school building or in childcare the same way that they were before the pandemic. Many schools remain closed or, doing some kind of mix of remote or hybrid learning. So getting the meals out and making sure that kids still have access to breakfast and lunch and after-school meals is really important. So I wanted to quickly touch on some of these waivers and options that are possibilities right now. And really the big one is that meals, instead of being consumed on site, which is the normal requirement, they can be taken home or delivered. So that was really critical in supporting social distancing, and when schools closed, it made sure that families and children could still receive those meals, and that remains an option now. The next thing that was really big is that meals can be served in areas that weren't eligible previously. So programs that are serving summer meals and after-school meals right now, they don't have to meet that 50% eligibility requirement that I mentioned earlier, which means that more communities that are struggling are now open to participate. Another key piece, along with the non-congregate option that I mentioned, is that parents and guardians can pick up meals without children being present, which was really critical and a really great waiver. Multiple days worth of meals can be distributed at one time, which is, again, really important. So instead of families having to come back to a school building every day to pick up meals, they can actually come, if the school is doing it this way, and pick up to a week's worth of meals, and it just really limits the amount of times that they have to go and be around other people. So that was really a big win. And then the other option, flexibility that I wanted to mention, is around the after-school enrichment, which I just touched on. So, of course, schools are not operating the same way that they usually do, and neither are after-school programs for the most part. So USDA issued guidance around this, saying that after-school enrichment can be virtual or taken home. So many states and partners have really, opted into this and are doing a really great job of making these activities available. And I know that we'll hear some examples of this later, and we'll make sure that some of these get provided out in the webinar recording. But I did want to mention this because although, a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club or a similar after-school activity might not be happening in person, that doesn't mean that they can't serve CACFP after-school meals. That is still an option during this time and is really critical to closing that nutrition gap. Next slide, please. All right, so I just wanted to quickly wrap up by talking a little bit about looking ahead. So like I mentioned, many of the waivers are still available, and they will be available through June 30th, 2021 at this time. There has also been some really great expansion around pandemic EBT, and if you aren't familiar with pandemic EBT, this was a program that was created back in the spring when schools closed. It gives households an EBT card with the value of the free school breakfast and lunch reimbursement rate for the days that schools were closed during the pandemic. So this was something that was available in the spring and then was also expanded in 2020 to run through this full school year. The other exciting piece of this is that it is expanded past school age kids. So kids 6 and under can also participate if the families are eligible. So that was a really big win, and we see this as being a really important complement to the meals that are being provided by schools and by community sponsors. And then I won't spend too much time on this third bullet because I know that Jerry just mentioned the emergency funding that's available for providers that lost reimbursement in the spring. I would just add that this is also an option for schools that lost reimbursement in the spring. So it's for both CACFP and school providers. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up my slides, but I did want to just draw attention. We did just release a report a couple weeks ago looking at participation in April 2020 compared to April 2019, and those are the graphs that you see on this page here. And the top one is breakfast and lunches, and then the bottom are suppers and snacks. So looking at the same time period, just year to year. And I think that this is just really showing how, especially for lunches and for suppers and snacks, how, you know, with these waivers, they're really great and they're making sure that families are still able to access, but we still need to make sure that programs are able to opt in to serve these meals and that families are able to participate. So looking ahead into the spring, as we know that the pandemic continues to impact schools and community programs, just thinking about partnerships in your community and making sure that the meals continue to be served. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and we are going to turn it over to our partners at the Afterschool Alliance who really do great work in shining a light on the need for after-school programming, which has always been important and, like we keep mentioning, is more important now. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Eric. Eric joined the Afterschool Alliance in July 2009 and coordinates and advances the Afterschool Alliance's policy efforts at the federal level by helping develop policy goals and implementing strategies that advance access to quality after-school programs for all. So Eric, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Clarissa, and just thank you to FRAC and Alliance for Healthy Generation and Too Small to Fail for having me on today. Looking forward to this and to your questions as well. So today I'm going to share some findings from 2 surveys that were released late last year by the Afterschool Alliance that really hopefully paint a picture of the current after-school environment, both pre-COVID and coming out of COVID, as well as during COVID, including the meals piece. So, thanks, slide. Yeah, that's good. So America After 3 p.m. is the most comprehensive look at how kids in America spend the hours after school. We do the survey every 5 to 6 years. The first one was back in 2004. The most recent one before the one that was just released was in 2014. And just quickly want to acknowledge the funders for this. It's a huge undertaking for us and a big part of the years that we do this. So the New York Life Foundation, Overdeck Family Foundation, Wallace Foundation, S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, Altria Group, and the Walton Family Foundation, as well as ongoing support from the Charles Sturt Foundation. We're fortunate that these funders saw the value in this project and scope, and we're willing to support it. Next slide on methodology. There are more details in the report, and I'll have the link at the end to track that down. But the key things to know is this was done in conjunction with Edge Research. We had about 30,000 household respondents, including at least 200 from every state. It was done online and supplemented with phone interviews. And that the data for America After 3 p.m. for 2020 was conducted between January and March, so before the pandemic sort of shut things down. So in order to address that, we did a supplemental survey back in October that reached about 1,200 families to offer sort of a mid-pandemic update to the study. And next slide, thanks. The 5 big takeaways I'm going to try to get through here quickly. So we have time for questions and to hear from other guests. But to really dig into the findings, and the new study paints a picture of unmet need, with the heaviest burden falling on low-income families and families of color. The 5 key takeaways from the research, I'm going to spend a little bit of time touching on each one. So we'll start with the first one. So next slide. The first big takeaway is that unmet demand has reached an all-time high. Next slide. Thanks. So if after-school programs were available to them, half of all non-participants, or nearly 25 million children, would take advantage of those programs. So that's the demand that's out there that's currently not being filled, mostly because we'll talk about what those barriers are, but mostly because of lack of access to programs. So that's up 60% since we started doing America After 3 p.m. back in 2004. And it's really the highest unmet demand level in the history of doing this survey. Next slide. So that basically means for every 1 child in a program, there are 3 more who would be in a program if one were available to them. And back in 2014, the last time we did this, that was 1 child in a program for every 2, that there would be 2 waiting to get in. So a substantial increase in the last 6 years. Next slide. So looking more closely at the families expressing demand for after school, we find that families of color, families with low income, and those with children in elementary school are more likely to want to participate in a program. That being said, participation in middle and high school programs actually continues to grow, but on the demand side, it's really at with younger students. Next slide. So fortunately, the number of young people unsupervised in the hours after school has also declined since 2014. Although notably, there's been a small increase in the number of elementary school age kids who are now in self-care. And again, this is pre-COVID, so we'll talk about the changes there in a second. But that's the same group, so parents of elementary school children, who express the highest level of unmet demand for after school. The 7.7 million children that are not only not accessing after-school programs in Enrichment, also obviously then don't have access to after-school meals and snacks that are offered at those programs. All right, so moving on to the second key takeaway, demand surges as parents recognize key benefits from after-school participation. Next slide. So behind the high levels of demand for after-school, we really see a growing recognition of the importance of these programs. So in the past, going back 15, 20 years, after-school really was seen, I won't say as babysitting, but as really more as childcare. But there's been a growing recognition of the wide range of benefits that programs provide, that it's really positive youth development for elementary, but middle and high school as well, that programs provide for young people and their families. And you see kind of a breakdown of some of the top ones there, go into more of those. But on the next slide, we'll get specifically into meals. So again, pre-COVID data showed the majority of programs, both for low income and higher income, as well as across rural, suburban, and urban programs are offering meals or snacks. And the next slide. So, and with that, we asked about the level of importance. And so while things like safety of environment is at 93%, knowledgeable and caring staff, professional staff also at 93%, you see the importance of meals is still up there at 75% for low-income families. And then if we go to the next slide on sort of post-COVID, well, I should say post, we're not there yet, during COVID, from the fall October survey, continuing to see programs meeting the need and demand, and actually even more programs offering meals during this time, utilizing the waivers that were discussed, that Clarissa and Jerry talked about, as well as for programs in some cases that are accessing private supports to provide meals as well, or a combination. After-school programs stepped up during COVID, starting in March and through the summer, after-school and summer programs, and in the fall to help families access healthy meals, both at in-person programs where those were still possible, particularly for children of essential workers early on, and then to drop off or pick up for virtual after-school programs. A recent trend, one to flag too, that started in the fall and continues now this in 2021 is the prevalence of community learning hubs, which are Something somewhat new that came out of the pandemic, which are in-person all-day programs, often up to 6 to 10 hours a day for school-age students that are offered in districts where school is virtual. So these programs are particularly driven by parents needing students to be not home alone or not home where they're working. So the programs are, again, often all day. They allow supervised learning for students to do their schoolwork. They provide access to technology, to hotspots, et cetera, but also meals, and often 3 meals and a snack where possible. And of course, the mentoring, tutoring, and programming for students, the staff that are on site. Sometimes these are in schools that are otherwise closed, but more often they're in community centers, museums, seen some at universities, office space, very creative as to where these programs are sprouting up. Next slide. So rounding out the parent benefit piece, I wanted to flag that families who are fortunate enough to have access to a program report the highest level of satisfaction with the programs in the history of us doing America After 3 p.m. So at a 94% satisfied with the program overall. The third piece, sadly, for the first time in the history of America After 3, we found a decline in the number of students benefiting from programs, and again, with cost and lack of programs as the key barriers. So costs, lack of a safe way to get to and from programs, and lack of available programs top the list of roadblocks. All three have become greater roadblocks in 2020 than they were in 2014. Next slide. These growing barriers translate into fewer young people in after-school programs today than we saw in 2014, and with participation levels even lower today than they were actually in 2009. And so that, of course, impacts access to after-school meals and snacks as well, with fewer students being in programs. While the decline is troubling, here on the next slide, even more troubling is that low-income families are most affected. So between 2009 and 2014, the number of low-income students in after-school fell by nearly 2 million, while the number of higher-income students dropped by less than 500,000. And next slide. So we really took a look at this closely because actually during that time, we've seen an increase in the federal funding for after-school, marginally increased. So coupled with the America After 3 p.m. data on participation in the nation and the data and the participation of the nation's largest funding streams for after school, really I found that over this time, about 2.1 million low-income young people were benefiting from publicly funded programs like 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which is the main public funding stream in the Department of Education. The public funding streams really seem to have been a lifeline for low-income young people and families as things like costs and other barriers have crept in. So most of the funding streams are not keeping up with the cost of providing a high-quality program and therefore are unable to serve more young people. So, for example, with this table for 21st Century, which increased by $28 million from 2014 to 2020, when you control for inflation, it's actually $10 million less that's provided now than then. So really a need getting to the advocacy piece of this for continued support. The last two I'm going to go through really quick in the interest of time. So we did see inequities evident. I'm sure by now you're recognizing that inequities that our study found. Just digging deeper into that briefly. On the next slide, I've mentioned already how barriers have grown since 2014, and you can see here that the barriers have been bigger amongst low-income families. As a result of those barriers, unmet demand for after-school has increased and is even greater among low-income families. And this highlights that a little bit more as well, and pointing out that the families of highest income brackets spend 5 times more on out-of-school time activities, including after-school, than those in the lowest income bracket. And the last piece, though, ending on a positive note, is parents continue to show strong support for expanding after-school opportunities. Public support actually is up from 84% in 2014 to 87%, with the overall and intensity of support growing as well. And that's across all party lines, ethnicity, and geography. And then next here, 2 quick slides on the 2020 parent survey findings. So, of course, COVID dominates barriers to participation after school this fall. But beyond those concerns, it's a lot of the same barriers that we saw pre-pandemic in America After 3 data. And unmet demand remains high, with 49% of children who would participate if a program were available to them, and that's either in person, virtually, or in a hybrid program. And then finally, on the last slide here, parents are, struggling managing during the pandemic, however, which I think we all know, and continue to express concerns for their children. But they want programs like after-school programs and youth development programs to address more than academics and to address some of those concerns as well around life skills, physical activity, social connections. And with that, the last slide with some contact information, and then I will pass it back to Clarissa to hear a little bit more about what some of those activities could look like from our next speakers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric, for that overview. I find that data so fascinating, and I think it just really gives insight on the need to support after-school programs, the important connection to nutrition, and like you mentioned, there are some really great opportunities to be working with state out-of-school time networks and state partners on providing that after-school programming. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Daniel Hatcher from the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, who is going to talk about resources to support remote enrichment. So Daniel, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
I'm so happy to start my year with you all. And yeah, I'm going to spend my time today just sharing a couple enrichment activities that you can do virtually. You could also do these in person or hybrid. They're super flexible activities. And again, they're focused on moving and grooving and really helping kids and adults connect with each other. I'll also say that you could use these in your staff meetings as well if you're thinking about supporting the staff within your programs. So excited to dive in. And I'll say that all of our work at the Alliance for a Healthier Generation maps back to the whole school, whole community, whole child model. And so if you're familiar with this model, there are components including nutrition services, family engagement, community engagement, physical activity. So we really use this as a blueprint to help guide the work that we do. And you're going to notice that, of course, in this call, we're touching on multiple pieces of this framework, and the activities that we're going to do, we're actually going to do them together. We'll check a few of these boxes as well. So again, things you can use with staff for employee wellness or family engagement or community involvement. And I will note that I did put some resources, I've linked to resources in my slides. So when you get a copy of these, you'll be able to click on those links and get access to that resource. I'll, of course, give you my email too. So if you want a quick copy of these slides, I'm very happy to share those with you. So let's dive right into our first activity. So let's get to the next slide. So this resource is called Fit Sticks. And I hope some of you are at your computer and looking at the chat box, because I'd love to engage with you there. So if you are familiar with this resource, if you've ever used this activity called Fit Sticks, put a yes into the chat box. And if you haven't, that's totally okay. Excellent. Brian has used them. They're super simple, and I really again like these because I think it's an activity that older students can lead. There's so many ways to adapt this, to expand and contract it to make it fit your needs. So on the slides, there are a few sticks. These are from a conference, I think, many years ago. So if you're following along on the computer, feel free to pick one of those activities. And if you haven't taken a break today, if you've been sitting behind your computer, do one of those. I'm sitting behind my desk, so I'm going to pick something that I can do pretty easily here. And I'm going to do reach to the sky. So I'm reaching to the sky. So if you want to do that Fit Stick with me right now, you can reach to the sky. Feel free to mix it up, because one of those Fit Sticks says toe taps. You could reach to the sky while you're doing a toe tap. So as you can see, this is just a really simple way to add some physical activity into any type of programming. These are things that you could send with students. You could make these on popsicle sticks. You could make them on construction paper, bookmarks, really anything that you have available where you could add a little bit of physical activity. Of course, I think this is a great way to get a lot of additional young people's input and voices as well. Let them pick the activities, work together to do the activities. Thanks, Mackenzie. I appreciate that positive feedback that you needed to stretch after sitting in the chair all afternoon. So now I'll ask a quick question. How could we connect this to math and maybe add a math extension to Fit6? Feel free to write into the chat box. How could we do a math extension? Well, we could put an equation on the back of the stick or the piece of construction paper. So, you know, if you could do 4 plus 2 front kicks, and that would be 6 front kicks. So you can add in a math extension. You could add in foreign language extensions. If you wanted to put a particular number in a foreign language and then put that back on the back of the fit stick. So simple ways to kind of, again, make this your own depending on the developmental level of the students you work with. So another reflection question for you is, how could we adapt fit sticks to foster connectedness and belonging? So think about that for a second. How could we adapt fit sticks to foster connectedness and belonging? Well, we could put questions on the back. So it could be, what's one word to describe what you want to experience this year? What's a superhero trait that you wished you had? So it's a simple way to use fit stick activities to bring in icebreaker questions. Thanks, Brian. Fit sticks that need a partner. Great idea. And it could be a way to meet someone new. So, these don't have to be used in real time. It could be, use your fit stick, and over the course of this week, I want you to find someone new to do the activity with and swap questions. So again, lots of flexibility here. So let's move on to our second activity. This is a gratitude poem, and I think we all could start out 2021 by thinking about something that you appreciate about yourself. So I would love for you, everyone who's on the call, to think about, what's one thing you appreciate about yourself? And one thing I put from the model poem, I wrote creative on this list. So you'll follow this similar format with the word that you come up with. So what's one thing you appreciate about yourself? And as you can see in my model, I have creative. And so then for each letter of that word, I listed out something I appreciate about someone else or the world around me, or things that I enjoy, or really anything else. So it's just a simple way to take a minute and practice gratitude, which has incredible benefits for our sleep, our immune system, our mood. And it's been, challenges are happening, so it's a great way to be more intentional by writing your gratitude down. So again, lots of ways to adapt and change up this activity depending on the students that you work with. You could do this at a staff meeting as well. So for time, let's move to the next slide. This is oh, Mackenzie, thank you. I'm gonna read yours out. I like this. Kind. And the words that describe things you're appreciative of: kickboxing, ice cream, nature, and dinner with family. Excellent example. That's a really good one. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Mackenzie, and the chat box. So again, those are just 2 resources, enrichment activities that you can try. I hope you participated and enjoyed a little break. In the slides, you'll get a list of many more. So these are some of my favorites, again, that can be used remotely. You could adapt them if you are working in a hybrid model as well. So everything from a video called Astro Sloth, which is all about moving really slow. So it's a fun physical activity that kind of helps you ground yourself and slow down. printable physical activity break cards. There's a guide that Healthier Generation developed in partnership with Kaiser Permanente around creating a caring school community. So you can learn a lot more about gratitude activities in that guide. So plenty more things to check out in these resources. And of course, I put my email at the bottom. So if you want this list right now, I'll be happy to send it to you via email. If you have questions, you have a resource or an enrichment activity that you want to share, I would love to hear and learn from you. So I think the very last slide might be, I don't have one more last slide, so it's that email. Please reach out if you have any questions or need anything. And I'll turn it back over to you, Clarissa.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. I know that I needed these activities today. And again, like we've been saying throughout the webinar, things are different right now with after-school programs and just more children being at home and, receiving meals in a different way. So having this as an option to share is really important. And I know that, again, a lot of partners are kind of combining these. I know many state agencies are looking to share examples of things like this to send home along with meals. So feel free to check these out. And Daniel is a great resource. Follow him on Twitter. He's a great person on Twitter, and they have a lot of great materials and things to share. All right, so we are going to go ahead to our last speaker. I know that we have around 13 minutes or so we're going to get through this and then save time for some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Jane Park. She is the director of Too Small to Fail, the Early Childhood Initiative of the Clinton Foundation, where she leads national partnerships with corporations, nonprofit organizations, and associations to support children and families across the country. And similarly to Daniel, she's going to share some activities and resources to support children 0 to 5. Jane?
Great. Thank you, Clarissa. And echoing you, thanks, Daniel. I also, echoing Mackenzie, needed that stretch after a long day of Zooms. So thank you. And Happy New Year to everyone. Really appreciate this opportunity to participate in this webinar, and sincere thanks to FRAC for hosting this with us today. I also just want to share a huge thanks to just all the community providers and leaders who are here today and are just working tirelessly every day to ensure children and families are getting the nutritional support they need to thrive, especially now when needs have just been exacerbated by COVID-19. So a big thank you. As Clarissa mentioned, I'm the director of Too Small to Fail. Too Small to Fail is the early childhood initiative of the Clinton Foundation. And just for a quick 1-minute background, we have been leading a national public awareness and action campaign called Talking is Teaching, Talk, Read, Sing. And we're focused on promoting children's early brain and language development through early childhood providers, WIC programs across the country, Head Starts. And another core strategy of ours has been to work through everyday environments. So Eric, you mentioned, after-school programs, but also thinking about, where are families spending time every day. So thinking about unconventional spaces like laundromats, family court waiting areas, the waiting areas of WIC clinics, grocery stores. We work through all these different spaces to try to transform them into literacy-rich environments. We actually build little libraries and play areas and learning nooks in laundromats across the country through a partnership with the Coin Laundry Association. And so we'd love to partner with anyone on this call here today or others to explore ways to engage families. We've been concerned now more than ever about the inequities that exist in families' access to early learning resources and opportunities that we know are just so critical to giving children a strong start in life. And just as we've witnessed with food insecurity during the pandemic, the gaps that existed in families' access to high-quality early childhood programs and literacy resources like books at home have just been exacerbated as well. So in response to COVID-19, we've distributed over 100,000 books through food banks, food distribution centers, pairing books with resources shared by WIC providers, through laundromats, shelters, and other spaces. And in addition to books, when we convened all of our national partners to really hear from our partners on the front lines working with families, in addition to all the needs that we're all here focused on here today in terms of nutrition, one of the greatest needs that our partners have identified was learning resources at home. So in addition to digital resources, physical, tangible resources like books and other things that families can use to engage their children in learning opportunities while they're disconnected from learning opportunities at school and childcare. So we created this indoor activities kit. It's the Talking is Teaching, Talk, Read, Sing Indoor Activities Kit, which is available for free in English and Spanish at talkingisteaching.org/indoors. And it's just filled with information and activities, both in English and Spanish, that parents can use. And the focus here is for our target here is parents and providers of caring for children from birth to 5. The simple tips and activities they can use with limited materials at home to engage their children. And so to go to the next slide, this is just kind of the introductory page where we create a template for parents and providers to create an indoor schedule for morning, afternoon, and evening. And they could just pick and choose whatever activities might work best for them. So if we move to the next slide, I'm just going to show a sample of some of the activities that we feature in our kit. Hand washing, of course, given COVID and health and safety recommendations, and not just through COVID, but all throughout the year, we make hand washing fun. And here's the lyrics to just a hand washing song that parents can sing while washing hands. So wash your hands, wash them every day, scrub in and out and all around, keep dirty germs away. And so parents can use this song to have fun while washing hands with their children. And this can also be printed as a little poster that could be placed around any kind of restroom area as well around the sink. We go to the next slide. So using imagination, making a fort, using cardboard boxes to make forts, or using big bed sheets, and just allowing children to fill it with their favorite toys and pretend they're on a camping trip or in outer space or a secret hideout. Through this kit, we really try to highlight that all these just small moments can have a big impact on brain development and also children's social and emotional development. Picking out costumes or just different size clothes from the closet and imagining your superheroes going on an adventure. And again, using a box as not just a box. It could be a castle or a rocket ship or a boat, or anything that a child imagines it to be. Next slide. Kitchen chemistry. The kitchen can be a wonderful laboratory for learning and exposing children to early math concepts and language and STEM. And so while preparing foods, talking about the colors and tastes and textures and the smells of the foods, talking together about what happens when you mix ingredients together, making homemade Play-Doh. Here's a simple ingredient here using water, salt, and just a tablespoon of oil. Or just, looking for recipes online to bake cookies or breads or muffins, and working together to measure, count, and mix ingredients. Next slide. Making music together. We did a national survey with families with Romper magazine and found that parents weren't really aware that just singing with your baby, not just talking and reading, but singing. We found that about 80% of the thousands of families that we surveyed weren't aware that singing with your baby actually boosts brain development. And so making music, making a tradition out of having a family kitchen band, using plastic containers and wooden spoons, or making your own rain stick with a paper towel tube, And we know that really kind of the secret sauce for building brains and vocabulary is that back and forth interaction. And so singing songs and encouraging children to sing along and sing back, and that call and response is really great for brain development. So hopefully we can all encourage families to, while they're indoors, make music together and have fun singing too. And here there's a link to free music playlists that we actually develop with Spotify. So talkingandteaching.org/Spotify, families can find all kinds of different playlists around healthy foods playlist, diaper time playlist, family dance party, and we brought on celebrities to share tips and information in between the songs on how parents can turn kind of everyday moments into a learning moment. Next slide. Let's get moving. Daniel, I think I want to add your rain stick idea here, but animal moves and grooves. My kids and I just had a blast for about an hour just naming different animals and taking turns moving like a snake or a rabbit, or as you're walking down the sidewalk or even in the living room. Doesn't take a ton of space, but just naming animals and pretending you're moving like that animal, playing red light, green light, or just turning on music and having a family dance party can be great for physical health, but also just a mental and emotional health as well. Next slide. Going on a scavenger hunt. You can go on a scavenger hunt anywhere, especially with young children, playing games like I Spy with My Little Eye. This could be done in a living room, within a home, or just a short walk around the neighborhood. Scavenger hunt for letters and numbers, or going on a shape adventure. Next slide. And of course, reading together. When we often receive questions from parents on when should I start reading with my baby? Is it when they can read yet? And what we share is that it's never too early to read books together. And so it could be a wonderful way to bond and learn new words. And so the importance of reading together, and not just reading, but as families are going through the pages, really encouraging them to ask who, what, when, where, why questions, and pausing to ask a lot of these open-ended questions that just build critical thinking skills, but also prompt conversation about the book, about how a character might be feeling, or why this character is acting a certain way. And then afterwards, acting out the story, reading the book together and pretending you're a specific character from the book could be a great way to extend learning as well. Next slide. And finally, sharing kindness. Can't think of a more important time to promote this message, but simple things like encouraging kids to write caring notes to someone they might care about, whether it's a teacher, family member, or friend, writing or coloring kind messages on sheets of paper and taping them on windows or doors, or a compliment game, sitting in a circle with your family, take turns using words to say something nice about the other person. So Daniel, I'm going to agree with you, knowing you, creative is definitely a wonderful word as well as kind. So hopefully we can keep this compliment game going through our own channels and people who are in our circles. And next slide. And here's just a list of just some household items we can encourage parents to collect. Again, things that they may already have at home. Art supplies and kitchen supplies, and our hope is that some of the activities in this guide really gives parents just ideas on how they can use all of these different things to help their children learn through these everyday moments. Next slide. And all these resources are available and more. We have posters and links to our free text messaging program. We also have resources focused on talking about healthy foods and healthy eating and promoting mealtime conversations, all available at talkingisteaching.org. And our initiative website is toosmall.org. And it would be great if you could follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at number 2, small to fail. And I think that was it. We can go to the last slide. I think it's just a big, I do have one more slide. All of the activities that we feature in the kit, we actually have on talkingisteaching.org/indoors a special kind of companion piece on how all of these could be adapted for children with special needs. And so there's an adaptation page as well. And last slide is just a big thank you. I know we're at time, I just want to share a quote from one of my all-time heroes. Fred Rogers once said, "Anyone who helps a child is a hero to me." And, as you may remember, he also once said that just during scary times, look for the helpers. And today, just not looking at you, but knowing that you're all here and being in your presence, albeit virtually, just gives me greater hope for a safer, healthier, and kinder 2021. So thank you, and I sincerely hope we can all keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Jane. And yes, that was amazing. We're going to make sure that toolkit gets shared. I love the graphics, love all those activities. I know that we are at time, so I'm going to wrap up. But quickly, I did want to just highlight the one question that I wanted to make sure we covered on today's webinar, and I understand that folks have to hop off. But this this question is about pandemic EBT. So, Jerry, I'm wondering if you could just speak to the question about how do families with children ages 6 and under apply for, are they eligible for pandemic EBT? So if you want to just cover that quickly, and we can wrap up from there. Jerry, I think you might be muted.
Children under 6 is going to be coming through the state agencies. It'll come through the SNAP state agency, but we are waiting for guidance from USDA to understand exactly how they're going to do that, and each state will make their own decision. So whether there'll be an application process or whether they'll end up issuing the benefits mainly through kind of automatic eligibility, and then just sending it to people in a SNAP card, we're not sure because we don't know what USDA is going to say, and it'll vary from state to state. But a likely scenario for one way that people will be able to get on with PEBT for children under 6 is that if they're on SNAP, when the SNAP agency runs the PEBT runs for school age, they'll also run it for under 6, and they'll use the simplifying assumptions that the school age unit, and probably many of you have worked hard to get, that say that if a school or a school district is qualifying either fully or partially, they'll just apply the rates to the under 6 benefits, and then they'll send them out on people's SNAP cards.
Great. Yeah, and I'll just add here that we do have a PEBT website or PEBT website page, so feel free to check that out. We'll make sure it gets out with the recording. But just in the interest of time, I do want to wrap us up because I know we're 4 minutes over. So I just want to say thank you all so much for joining. Hopefully you had some inspiration and ideas for after school and school meals and early child care meals. And I want to just thank Jerry, Daniel, Eric, and Jane for sharing such great information. A great way to kick off 2021. So we'll make sure you all get the recording. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out, and we hope to see you on our next webinar.